I want to turn now to Emily Harding. She is the Deputy Director with the International Security Program for Strategic and International Studies, and she is joining us live tonight. Emily, I want to start with what Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said today. The U.S. military does not have the forces or the firepower in Afghanistan to expand its current mission from securing the airport and collecting Americans and at-risk Afghans out of that area. How is there not a contingency for the situation that is unfolding right now?
The U.S. military, I think, assumed that they were going to be able to have the luxury of movement around Kabul when it came to getting American citizens and green card holders and those who had helped American forces out of Kabul in an orderly way. And that's just not the way it happened. In the end, the Taliban was able to walk through Kabul and basically take control of the country and prevent the U.S. military from moving around freely. Now, I have absolutely no doubt that something else that came out of the Pentagon today is true, and that is if special forces decided they wanted to locate themselves in a certain part of the city and pull out a certain American citizen, they could absolutely do it. It would be a very dangerous mission. And at scale, that's an extremely challenging thing to do. And I can understand why the Pentagon would say that it's not possible right now.
Putting more American lives at risk in the process. What are you hearing from your sources on the ground in terms of that trip from someone's home to the airport trying to escape?
It's extremely dangerous. There are mixed messages right now about whether or not the Taliban would let somebody through checkpoints if they had an American passport or if they had exit papers of one form or another. Some sources are saying that, absolutely, yes, they're letting people through, but then we're also getting scattered reports of checkpoints where they're not allowing folks through, where there's arrests or questioning or even beatings. And I can imagine that for some of these Afghan families, trying to run that gauntlet seems almost impossible.
And talk to me about the fear, because I know you have people that you're in communication with there. What is going through their minds right now as they determine, is it safe to leave my house? Do I intend to resist and take that risk? What are some of the thoughts that they're having in terms of their own personal safety for themselves and their families?
There's a discussion about whether to go to the airport at all right now or whether to stay put. The crowds around the airport have been huge. There have been reports of stampedes and of dangerous things happening right around the airport. So I think it's a difficult decision whether to try to make the run and get in one of the lines or whether to wait. The American military is saying that we're going to keep moving planes in and out of the country as long as necessary to get all the American citizens out and to try to get as many people who helped the United States out as possible.
I want to talk to you for a moment about the most recent Afghan president, Ashraf Ghani. He fled, as we know, with a whole lot of money. I spoke with a refugee last night who called him a traitor, said he turned his back on the Afghan people. He's now in the United Arab Emirates tonight. Is there a scenario in which he faces any sort of consequences for leaving?
I'm not sure he'd face any international justice kinds of consequences. I suppose that his countrymen criticizing him right now feels like consequences enough. I think he had a very difficult decision to make. He's saying that he left because he didn't want to see any further bloodshed in his country. I know that a lot of people are saying that if he had stayed, if he had said we're gonna hold on in Kabul for as long as possible, then there might have been more resistance to the Taliban. I think that kind of second guessing doesn't do anybody a lot of good right now, though.
Former Afghan President Hamid Karzai is in talks right now with the Taliban on how to transition the government. Based on what you're hearing, what will that look like?
I expect that it'll be a government very much on the Taliban's terms. They're in a position of strength to an extreme right now. They don't have a lot of incentive to negotiate. Karzai has proven himself a very capable deal maker in the past and may be able to convince them that he understands the international community very well and can tell them what the international community needs to see in order to allow the Taliban to be as a government. I expect those negotiations are going to be in-depth and long-term, but I expect that the final result is going to come out on the Taliban's terms.
Watching it very closely tonight. Emily Harding, as always, appreciate your time. Thanks for coming back.
Thank you.